Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid, and I'd like to thank you all for joining me on another edition of the most powerful platform for truth bar none on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and we'll be joined by Professor Salim Mansur out of Canada shortly. We're waiting for him to join us, but since we're waiting, I want to talk to you guys for a minute because the name of the show today is titled Collision Course, West Asian Smashup. What do I mean by that? And why did I put that title there? First of all, before I go into that, I want to go to Silly Motor Lover down there and tell him I'm sorry I made a mistake and deleted one of your comments. By mistake, I was trying to add you with a wrench, but I made a mistake and deleted one of your comments. So please forgive me. It wasn't YouTube. That was on me. I want to apologize. I think it was Silly Moto Lover. Yeah. But anyway, what do I mean by a smash up? We're headed for war. Now, listen, there's a lot of people reporting on this right now. All right. That war seems inevitable. But when I was saying this 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and I was telling you how this thing was going to stack up, I was on the fringe. I was not telling you guys out of emotions. I was telling you guys about what is actually taking place, because and Salim is in the building, so I got to bring him in. So we'll go into that right now, and I got to give him the greetings. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam, brother.
Yes, sir. And everybody, yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. For everybody who's joining us, we'd like to thank you all again. And Brother Mansur, I want you, because when we left off on our last show, you and I promised to come back on and do something about West Asia, and which is right now what they call the Middle East. What is actually going on right now? Because there's a buildup, a major buildup. There are threats and counter threats, and we see that the American empire has boxed itself up in such a position that if it strikes Iran, it loses its position globally because of the economic consequences of it. And if it doesn't strike Iran, it loses its position globally, because now nations are saying, hey, we can stand up to the empire because the empire is busted.
Yes, brother. Brother, can you give me 30 seconds? I've got to blow my nose.
Yes. Everybody. So, yeah, I told you we would have Professor Salim Mansur back on. So, excuse me. Shout out to everybody in the chat, too. I want to shout out to Serious Biz, who was in here from the jump. I want to give a shout out to the Prof girls and Flipper Clip. Shout out to Silly Motor Lover. Man, I tell you the Blue Pill Diaries. Shout out to Golmo 2427. M Sparks is in the building. JWCL. I'm sorry. I know who you are, but this name right here throws me. So, salam, everyone. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Again, could you give us a rundown on your take? Because it seems like America has boxed herself in that if she does this, that could be the end of the American empire, especially in West Asia. But if she doesn't do this, it could also be the end of the American empire globally as she loses face.
Yes, brother. I mean, you're talking about this now in the context of Iran, right?
Yes.
It's almost like a Hamlet, to be or not to be, to bomb or not to bomb. and as I would say to my students, those who know how to play chess, America is in a position of zugzwang, which means whichever move it makes, it can turn negative. It doesn't have a good move on the chessboard. It has boxed itself in a situation because it is being driven not by America's interest, not by the global interest and America's position in the world, but it is being driven by Bibi Netanyahu and the Zionists and the Jewish donors in America. The interest of the Zionists, of Bibi Netanyahu, is not the same as the interests of Americans, the vast majority of Americans. But Mr. Trump, Donald Trump, the president, has totally sold himself to the Zionist interest. They have bought him over. So yes, I mean, if he strikes Iran, or he gives the signal to the Israelis to strike Iran, and then he follows it up as he did in June 2025, last summer, Iran has already said repeatedly that any strike on Iran by the Americans or the Israelis will unleash the entire Iranian resources and power, their military equipment, particularly the missiles, their hypersonic missiles, their intercontinental ballistic missiles. They will release all of that. I mean, they showed that in June of 2025, and that's why Bibi Netanyahu, after 12 days, cried, no more, and asked President Trump to bring about a ceasefire. But at this time, the Iranians are not going to stop. The last time, Iranians did not hit hard. It just sent the signal that we are capable of taking out all of your infrastructure and you have no defense for it. And in the period since June to now, 8 months, the Iranians have worked hard to build up their defense, and they have been entirely supported by Russia, China, and the BRICS countries, countries like Pakistan, which is in a sort of an alliance. I mean, it is a neighboring country, but in a sort of an alliance with Saudi Arabia, and in this case, as an Islamic country, Muslim majority country, are prepared to defend Iran. And Pakistan is a nuclear power country, nuclear weapon state. So the situation is very different. The American forces in the Middle East are very vulnerable. You saw that last year in March when President Trump launched Operation Rough Rider to ability to destroy Yemen, and he sent 2 aircraft carriers into the Red Sea, which the Yemeni, the Ansarullah, were blocking shipping in the Red Sea through the Bab el-Mandeb into the Gulf of Aden, which is their choke point. And the Americans had to retreat. They had to pull out the 2 aircraft carrier after losing 2 F-35 or F-16 and losing some other equipment. And they were clean targets for the Houthis. And Houthis is a very poor country. It has not got the infrastructure in terms of money, resources to build up what Iran has built up or what Pakistan has built up. And yet, Houthis, with the equipment that they had, and then they did their own engineering on those equipment, that is the missiles, they were ready to knock off the American aircraft carriers if the American aircraft carriers had carried on pushing against Yemen. But also the Yemenis were in full targeting of the Israelis. They had hit the Ben Gurion airport. They had hit some of the major installations in Israel to demonstrate that they can do it. And the Americans retreated by claiming that they had won. But Yemen is still standing. I mean, Yemen was very badly hit, very badly knocked. The public suffered, poor country. But they don't have a free hand unless America and Israel decide to go nuclear. And that we can discuss, down the road. The situation with conventional weapons is such that technologically, the defensive forces, in this case Iran, is in a much much stronger position in opposition to the attacking forces. And that was demonstrated also during this end of December, early January. Um, Israeli Mossad agent, CIA agent, penetrating Iran and raising this insurrection or effort to raise an insurrection, a colored revolution, and decapitate the government, strike at the leadership, which is what they have been doing, which is what Israel has been doing, striking at the leadership. Well, Iran can strike at the Israeli leadership, but they haven't done that. Or the Yemenis can strike at the Israeli leadership, and they haven't done that. Um, but what Iran did with the support of Russia and China, Russia provided all the infrastructure and technology to capture the Starlink that had been distributed by Elon Musk, 40,000 Starlink, and not only, seize them, but through reverse engineering, figure out who are the people that were using it, or who had the contacts with Elon Musk and, of course, with the MI6, the CIA, and the Mossad, and they took them all out. That insurrection failed. Though this insurrection, they claim it was an uprising of the people, but if it was the Iranian people, they would not be burning mosques. They would not be destroying, ambulances and fire brigade trucks. They wouldn't be killing and shooting young children, which is what they did in going into the mosque. And so this was a planned attack. I mean, Iran has been infiltrated by various discontent elements in the different ethnic groups in Iran. Iran is a multi-ethnic society. So there are Azeris, there are Baluchis, there are Arabs, there are Turkomans, there are Kurds, and the Kurds were one of the largest group of people that had penetrated from northwestern Iran through Iraq and Syria, and they were all rounded up, and that was defanged. So this time, last time, Iran was taken by surprise. I mean, if you recall, brother, the Iranian delegate was in Oman, Muscat, sitting and talking with the American delegate, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, about the demands of the Americans that Iran must disarm, Iran must acknowledge that it will not go for nuclear weapons, and so on. And the irony is that Iran has basically agreed to, all the way going back to 2003, not only 2015 when the JCPOA was signed, but going all the way back to 2003 when Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, gave the legal opinion, the religious opinion, fatwa, that Iran will not acquire nuclear weapon. But that doesn't mean that Iran is not going to have a peaceful nuclear industry for domestic purposes, that is, for power grids, for medical research and medical applications. And that is all recognized within the UN treaties. I mean, Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In fact, Iran was among the first countries to sign the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty when it was introduced in 1968. And 2 years later, the Iranian parliament ratified it. So Iran has been a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, International Atomic Energy Association, agency, right from the beginning, and Iran has not gone ahead unilaterally to break those treaties and go for the nuclear weapon. Indeed, uh, the Iran's membership in the Non-Proliferation Treaty and all of the other conventions and treaties under the UN Charter um, was signed during the pre-revolutionary days, that is, during the time when the Shah of Iran was the monarch. That is, as I said, 1968. Um, but when the revolution happened in 1979 and the Islamic Republic was founded, the leadership of the Iranian Islamic Republic did not renounce or disavow or abrogate those treaties. They remained, um, signatories of those treaties. But there you have the irony. The Americans insist upon Iran completely disarming itself in terms of any nuclear research, nuclear enrichment of uranium, whereas Israel has not acknowledged its weapons, has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is not monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency of the UN, and that there is no complaint about it. I mean, the Americans are fully happy with the Israeli situation. I mean, that is a double standard, or worse, because that was what exactly President Kennedy was looking for, in insisting upon that Israel come clean on its nuclear policy, going back to 1960s, early 1960s, when he came into the presidency in 1961. And we all now know that Israel was behind the killing of President Kennedy, among other people, whether it was the Cubans, whether it was the CIA, whether it was the Nostra Nostra or the mafia, Italian mafia. But among all of that, Iran had its own fingerprint. I mean, the Jack Ruby who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, in the custody of the police, the Dallas police force, and therefore killed the star witness. If he had been brought into trial and put on the witness stand, he would have told his story. So Jack Ruby was Jacob Rubinstein, a player for the Zionists, for the Jewish mafia. So all of these things are known, though the American government will not admit it and will not open up the file. But coming back to Iran, the pressures on Iran by the Americans at the behest of the Israelis, and the whole world can see that, is something that goes to show the immense amount of animosity, enmity, you might almost say racism and bigotry against the Iranian people and the Islamic Republic of Iran. The question that hangs over our head, brother, especially among our American brothers and sisters who want to know about these things, is why is this so? What has Iran done that makes America such a hostile superpower against Iran?
Yeah. And I was listening to a interview by Rick Sanchez. He was doing an interview in Iran. He was in the capital of Tehran, and he was interviewing someone that used to be part of the Revolutionary Guard. And he was asking him about does Iran want to acquire nuclear weapons, and they blatantly said no, they don't need nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, and this is the point I have to get to before I get to the next point. The first Ayatollah condemned chemical and nuclear weapons before the Ayatollah that they have right now. So this is not something that's just here in the JCPOA. This is something that goes back decades and decades that they renounced it. So speaking on that, as I was listening to journalistically speaking with Rick Sanchez, the former IRGC guy said we don't need nuclear weapons, and then he made a statement. He says we have missiles with the capability to do as much damage as 2 or 3 nuclear weapons. And when he said that, it caught my eye and my ear. And I'm saying, do you believe that Russia has transferred the Oreshnik, or a upgraded, or the Chinese have transferred one of those kinetic missiles that they have to Iran, for Iran to openly state that, listen, we don't need nuclear weapons because we have the destructive power in our missile forces that does not require us to resort to nuclear weapons?
No, you're right. Whether Russia has provided uh, Oreshnik or has provided and shared the Oreshnik technology are two different things. Um, I would imagine that the Russians have shared some aspect of the Oreshnik technology because Iran has developed its own hypersonic missiles, and Oreshnik is a hypersonic missile. So uh, here, let me say this, brother. The Iranian people are a very sophisticated people.
Hmm.
You know, they're not simply a third world country. I mean, the idea that just because China was a third world country, and Pakistan and India and Iran and so on and so forth, at the end of the Second World War, that 80 years since then, they have not developed their own capacity, their own people, trained scientists, in every field. And in the case of Iran, not simply in the case of China or India or maybe Brazil, but in the case of Iran, because the amount of vilification that Iran suffers by the media in the West about human rights violation, about women, Iranian women are fully participating in all of the infrastructure, educational infrastructure, research infrastructure. Iranian women have proven themselves to be among the top mathematicians in the world. So it is not that the Iranians are incapable of, I mean, they have built it up. But coming back to the nuclear issue, that is enriching uranium to the weapon grade level, you know, uh, I'm not a physicist, but what I have studied and understand is uranium 235 can be enriched to a certain level above 90 or close to 90%, that uranium 235 will become a fissile material. It can go into a critical mass and become a weapon. But uranium 235 enriched to lower levels, below 60%, is used for medical purposes.
Hmm.
And the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, does not prohibit that. In fact, the NPT recognizes the peaceful use of uranium, of isotopes that are used for medical purposes or for, as I said, developing power resources, electricity, and so on. This is recognized and fully, uh, what's the word for it? Allowed, permitted. It is not prohibited. And that's exactly the sovereign right of Iran to carry on with this, as is the sovereign right of any country. Um, Again, as signatories to the treaty and as open to monitoring and keeping a track by the UN through the IAEA. And Iran has fulfilled those obligations. There has not been any complaint about that. That is why when in 2015, after a lot of negotiation carried out because of the Americans, the Europeans were ready to come to terms with Iran because Europe wants to sell its resources to Iran. That is, its products, its manufactured products to Iran, because Iran would be a important customer. Because Iran is one of the richest oil producing country, gas producing countries, so it has. But the Americans, since the 1979 revolution, has put the strictest sanctions on on Iran. Iran cannot trade openly. Iran cannot have use of the banks openly. So Iran has been constrained by these American imposed sanctions. So coming back to Russia, Russia recognizes all of this. And there's again a backstory we can get into it. Um, the Russia and Iran are neighbors, historic neighbors. They share a common border in the north, on the Caspian Sea. But once the Soviet Union broke apart, collapsed in 1991, 92, then those part of the Soviet Union that were on the borders of Iran, they became independent states like Azerbaijan, like Kazakhstan, like Turkmenistan. These are all on the Caspian Sea. And Iran is on the southern part of Caspian Sea, so they were neighbors. It's a long historical relationship, positive and negative, because Iran was also a civil, a sort of a empire going back to the 18th, 19th century. And Russia at that time was an empire trying to move south. And so there were conflicts between Iran and Russia. And many of these territories on the Caspian Sea, north of Iran, were captured by Russia, and they became part of Russian Empire. But then after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1952, 1991, 92, these states, as I'm repeating myself, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, they became independent states. But then there are other regions on the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus, they still remain part of Russian Federation, but they are Muslim majority, completely Muslim majority population. Azerbaijan was part of the Persian Empire that was captured by the Russian, So they are Azeris, just as the current Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, is an Azeri. But their language, apart from their own vernacular language, their main spoken literary language is Persian, Farsi. The current president of Iran, Pezeshkian, is also an Azeri. So there are a lot of Azeri population in Iran, in northern Iran on the coastline of the Caspian Sea. And then there are those who spill over into Azerbaijan, which is now an independent state. So Russian relationship is deep, and Russia under Putin has become, in effect, a leader of the global South through the BRICS nation. And Russia has very strategic reasons to support Iran because it shares a common border. And the Zionists and the American imperialists who have been trying to dismantle Russia, as you know, brother, that's the proxy war in Ukraine. They will use that entrance point among other entrance points, this one through Azerbaijan, to strike at Russia. And so Russia is going to be, very alert to that possibility, but very close with Iran to monitor that area and to protect that area. So that is a strategic reason. And they have shared the technology. I mean, they shared this technology over Starlink. So they sharing the technology on missiles is very much a possibility, but I don't think so. They will make it public. I mean, this would be in the area of national interest both for Russia and Iran if they have exchange their technology, or if they have been provided, that is, Russia has provided Iran with equipments of this nature, they're not going to broadcast it to the world, particularly to the Anglo-American Zionist world. They know the common enemy. Um, and on the other hand, what is public is known that the Russians have provided Iran with the most sophisticated air defense radars, S-400s and so on. And it has also provided them with some of the top of the line fighter aircrafts and bombers um, during this period. And so also China. So Iran has turned towards Russia and China. Iran is a member of BRICS nation, but Iran also has a memorandum of agreement with both Moscow and Beijing. And I here might want to remind uh, your people that the late Ayatollah Khomeini, the first supreme leader, before he died, wrote a very important letter that was hand delivered to, at that time. This was the last days of the Soviet Union, but nobody knew that the Soviet Union would collapse. So Ayatollah Khomeini died in 1989. So this letter was written sometime around 87, 88. It can be easily found through the search engine. And it's a very long letter. And it was sharing of that historical relationship, the commonality of being neighbors, and the advice that Ayatollah Khomeini gave to Gorbachev, as a warning about what he called the Shaitanul Akbar, that is the great Satan, and Shaitanul Asghar, the little Satan. So, but Gorbachev lost out in the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then during the period of, Boris Yeltsin, when he was the president, Moscow turned towards the West, and Moscow's economy was taken over by Russian oligarchs, many, if not most of them, being Russian Jews. And they were out to basically squeeze Russia of its resources, and then Boris Yeltsin, brought in Vladimir Putin, as his deputy. And when he died, Vladimir Putin succeeded Boris Yeltsin in 2000. And then since then, except for the period that he had to constitutionally step down so that Medvedev became the president, I think that was in the period 2012, 2016. Boris Yeltsin served as prime minister, and then he came back with the election to be once again the president. So Putin recognized what Ayatollah Khomeini had said in his letter to Gorbachev. And under Putin's leadership, Russia has turned towards a relationship with Iran, which has only grown stronger given the opposition of the Western powers. That relationship now, joined by the relationship with China, is a relationship that provides Iran with the balance which would not have been there if both China and Russia had not turned to embrace Iran. And of course, Russia itself, has oil resources, fossil fuel. It is one of the richest countries in terms of natural and mineral resources, possibly the richest country. But China is not. China doesn't have fossil fuel, and so is dependent upon importing fossil fuel. And 90% of Iranian petroleum export, 90% goes to China, which constitute around about 14-15% of Chinese import. So you can see 90% of Iranian export amounts to 14-15% of Chinese import. That means the extent to which China is dependent on Middle Eastern oil. I mean, that was the case with Venezuela. Venezuela was exporting oil to China. And that was one of the reasons that, among the various reasons that was concocted by President Trump to attack Venezuela and kidnap Nicolas Maduro. So I think that's the background uh, that is there, and of course, um, America and Israel want to decapitate because they have become totally rogue state. I mean, the biggest rogue state, the biggest terrorist state today in the world is America and Israel, and that's exactly what Ayatollah Khomeini pointed out to Gorbachev. The great Satan and the little Satan. And what an irony, what a tragedy that America has sold out its own sovereignty, its own history to one segment of American population that amounts to less than 2% of America's population. Brother, I mean, the black Americans are what? About 15-18% of American population.
It's between, I don't know the percentage, but I know we constitute 40 to 60 million people, and the United States population is 360 million people.
Among saying exactly. So I mean, where Israel or American Jews is about 2% of the population, and the blacks are in double figures. I don't have it on the top of my head. I would depend upon you to correct me. And look at the attitude, look at the behavior of the ruling class. This is abominable, and the world is witnessing this. The world is watching what is happening today. Iran has, I think, the maximum support from the people of the global South, Africa, Latin America, and of course Asia, and all the Islamic countries. Um, Against what they're faced with. And what they've been faced with is after the revolution, which was not an anti American revolution, it was a genuine revolution of the Iranian people for their own independence and sovereignty that was taken away from them by the Americans. The CIA coup in 1953, joined by the MI6, the British. And that's what they have done to all of these Middle Eastern, North African states. I mean, remember the famous uh, memorandum that Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, was shown after 9/11. General Wesley Clark was the supreme commander of the NATO forces in Europe, and an American. And he was shown this memorandum, and then he spoke about it, that the memorandum that he was shown talked about regime change in 7 Middle Eastern, North African countries within 5 years. Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. You know, so of those 7 countries in the last quarter century after 9/11, only Iran is standing defiantly because they did the regime change in Iraq, in Libya, in all of these countries. At a tremendous cost to human life, apart from everything else, the destruction of the infrastructure. These are poor countries trying to develop. And that's what was done to them. And that's exactly what they want to do to Iran. And who benefits? It is all for the sake of Israel, because Israel has to be defended and Israel has to be made the regional hegemon. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and for that, everybody else has to sacrifice their future, their sovereignty, their state. And Iran has said no.
Mm. And you can't say no to empire. But it was a point that you made earlier. And you were talking about the intelligence of the Iranian people, and a lot of people when we're talking about technology, a lot of people attribute a lot of Iran's success to outside forces, and they missed the point that it was Iran that helped Russia and Ukraine with the drone technology, and it wasn't vice versa, and that proved to be a pivotal exchange of technology at that time, which turned the war completely in favor of Russian forces. So they have technology. A source of mine say that the Chinese also have like the CO2 or CO8 missiles. They gave them upgraded missiles of those. They gave them shorter sea missiles. They've given them radars that come from the HQ 9 air defense system, which is comparable to the S-300 system. As a matter of fact, someone told me, whispered in my ear, says that there are technicians, Chinese technicians in Iran right now, and they are showing them certain elements like technology that they should acquire from China, like the J10C and the J17 or the export fifth generation J35s and stuff like that. So there's a lot of mutual cooperation, and a lot of people don't understand that this cooperation is going on because of because of it is vital for everybody's survival. Iran has been under sanctions for 40 plus 50 years. Iran was telling Russia about the sanctions and let's do business, but Russia didn't really understand until they came under these immense sanctions, and now they are de-dollarizing and they're pushing towards the east rather than the west. So it behooves Russia and China to aid Iran, because that's right at the doorstep of both those nations. And as I often say, that Iran is China, Russia, and Central Asia's underbelly. And the United States know that if they can get Iran, they can completely surround Russia and China from the Pacific to West Asia, and they can have a gun at their head geopolitically. And that is one reason why Trump demanded a return of the Bagram air base in Afghanistan, because they wanted to keep tabs on China's testing of nuclear material in the Chinese border. So there's so much going on, but why don't you think that the Americans are informed enough to understand that this geopolitical game has major implications to it globally?
Well, I mean, you have mentioned several times the question of empire. Empire has its own logic. In American empire is simply the reconstruction of the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
You know? British Empire sought to dominate Asia. That is what led to the various conflicts between Britain and Tsarist Russia before the 1917 revolution. And for Britain, India, that they had conquered, was the point, the strategic location, which is Afghanistan, which is part of India, to stop Russia from expanding south. That was the great game in the 19th century. Just as Britain supported, brother, my battery is going down. I don't know why. Let me plug it in, okay, brother?
Okay.
Just let me see why.
We'll give him a little time to get his computer plugged in, everybody. But I'm glad. I want to take the time out right now to thank each and every one of you for joining us and giving us your time, because you did not have to do that. So we very much appreciate you giving us your time on this platform.
It is my pleasure, brother. It's my pleasure. But I don't understand what is happening to my computer. Why is the battery is going down? So I don't want to lose you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Yeah. Perseverance Chameleon. They're all panicking. Perseverance Chameleon says they're all panicking. I'm here for it. You know. What we're watching. See, the reason things are going the way they're going is because the empire does not want to do what's incumbent upon it. You know, when you have an arrogant power or an arrogant person or a person that has reigned so long and they've beaten everybody. So they come to think that, hey, in their mind, that they are the supreme and everybody else is beneath them. So even as you offer America and her minions a opportunity to make up for her transgressions or their transgressions because they have become inebriated on being the superpower. They don't think that the laws of the universe or the laws of physics or the laws of cause and effect applies to them. And so this is why I was talking to, for those of you who are listening, this is why I brought Professor Mansur on so that we can talk about these issues here because, as I said, Professor, when it comes to America, they don't think that the laws apply to them. Even right now, if you hear the discourse within just the average YouTube channel, they often talk about this rise of multipolarity. But in that, they don't talk about what happened to empires historically, what happened to empires that overextended themselves, that overspent themselves, that alienated themselves, that deindustrialized themselves. And all of that is happening at one time in America. And they still want the world to believe that as China and Africa and India and Russia emerge as poles of power, that America would still be able to be a top
Madam,
hegemon.
don't know why.
So, oh, he's getting help on his computer. So they still want people to believe that America will be number one or number two. How is that even a possibility when she is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world?
Yeah, yeah. This is the problem, brother. The transition of America from a republic, a constitutional republic, to an empire after 1945, though the transition had begun in the late 19th century, with the Spanish America War over Cuba that led to then further wars, which led to the conquest of Philippines. Um, this transition into an empire meant the destruction of the founding documents of America, that America would be a democratic constitutional republic. The very opening preamble of the American Constitution is "We the people" coming together. But Washington is no longer "we the people." We the people are the Epstein people. You're not part of the Epstein people, and so therefore, America doesn't represent you anymore. It doesn't represent anybody except for that 1% crowd that is now right in the face of the 99% of Americans says, F you, we can do this. Who are you to tell us what? So it is not simply lawlessness in terms of international law, which America helped create after 1945. So it is not against simply international law, it is against its own constitution. It has gone and violated it in a manner in which nobody who's doing the violation is held accountable. And the rest of the people around the world are watching that. So the question is, it's not simply what maybe, not maybe, it was done, what 2 centuries ago, 1 century ago, in the 19th century, or in the early part of the 20th century, what the European powers, including America, did to the people of the rest of the world, the colored people, the black people, the Chinese people, what they did. I mean, after all, they talk about their intellectuals, the American intellectuals I'm talking about, the empire's intellectual, they are predominantly white. Um, they're predominantly Anglo-Saxon, as the British and the Americans. Uh, and they talk about, for instance, Islam is a very violent religion and Muslims are very violent, just taking that as an example. And constantly, I mean, terrorism, the great war on terror that began with 9/11 and so on and so forth. And the media is full of this. And so the Iranian people are terrorists, the Iranian people are supporting terrorists. Uh, and the vast majority of people are fed this argument, which means they don't know the other reality, the more factual reality, that at least for 500 years from the age of discovery, which is Columbus and Hernando Cortez landing in the shores of America, the Europeans have been involved in what I call the gunpowder age. Gun
Mm-hmm.
came into use in the early 16th century, in the 15th century, which is when Columbus and Hernando Cortez arrived in the American shores. Um, so through the gunpowder era, that is over 500 years, it is the Europeans, so the Americans are of European origin. It is not Black Americans who came from Africa or Chinese American who came from Asia, or other Asians, Filipinos, Indians, and so on and so forth, who came to America in the 20th century, second half of the 20th century. It is not they, it is the European Americans who have engaged in industrial scale massacres of the colored people. Genocide after genocide in the Americas, the wiping out of the Aboriginal native Indians in America, and then, of course, the cruelty, the unimaginable cruelty of the slave trade and the slavery. 500 years of this history. And even if you don't go back 500 years, we just take the 20th century, it is the European Americans, it's America and its European allies that have used chemical and biological weapons, that have used atomic weapons, that have used high technology in industrial scale killing and massacre through 2 world wars, and all the other wars, like the war in Vietnam, like the wars in Africa, the humiliation of China, the drug trafficking and killing to make China an open door for exploiting the people over there for profit. So this is the history. And unless the American people come to terms with their history, other people who have woken up, who have, even if we say that it is not completely independent, but to the extent that they have a flag of their own, they claim that as their own country, just say India or Pakistan and so on and so forth, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, that in the last 50 years, these countries have become independent of colonial powers. They have the living memory, just as your people, the Black Americans, have living memory of slavery, from the grandparents and great grandparents. And so they see the West and how the West has behaved all this time through the lenses that the Americans themselves and the Europeans themselves deny. There is no self-awareness or admission that, yeah, we did this thing, and it is time that we acknowledge it. We are in the 21st century. It is time that we learn to respect other people in terms of their culture and their values. We may be technically more advanced, but that doesn't stop the other people catching up, and China has demonstrated it has caught up.
Mm-hmm.
China is no longer second to America. It is, in fact, the economy is today, the in terms of purchasing power parity, China's economy is the largest economy in the world. You know, and technologically, China is no longer second. America might have 3,000 nuclear weapons or 5,000 nuclear weapons, and the Chinese may have a fraction of it. The question is that the Chinese don't want nuclear weapons. Having a few dozen nuclear weapons will destroy the world. So what do they need the extra for? Right? So the whole question of rationality on this matter is missing in the intellectuals in America and in Europe. So one can now see, as independent country, one can now see that you cannot have a civil discourse. A civil discourse means recognizing the other party as equal and to be respected as you expect the other party to treat you as equal and to be respected. The age of master-slave relationship is over. But the Americans still, that is, Donald Trump still think that America has to be the number one. Well, you can be the number one provided, you compete fairly, equally, and respectfully. Nobody's going to, you line up for a 100-meter dash, nobody's going to question Usain Bolt beating everybody else, right? So that's a fair, equal, respectful competition. And in that fair, equal, respectful competition, you be the number one, and everybody will celebrate that, because the next time around they will try to do better to catch up with you and defeat you. That's the way civilization normally operate or should operate. There's no civilization. I mean, this clash of civilization, Huntington's theory, you must be familiar with it. This whole idea that was developed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it became sort of the Bible for the American empire to justify the Great War on Terror after 9/11. We now all know that 9/11 was an inside job. None of the Al-Qaeda people could function flying a big body airline into doing what it did. So it was an inside job, just as it was an inside job who blew up USS Liberty, who killed Kennedy, and so on and so forth. So except for the Americans, the rest of the world understands this. They're not convinced. I mean, when you have an Al-Qaeda member sitting in the Oval Office with the President of the United States, then who created Al-Qaeda? Was it created by Saudi Arabia? No. These are simple questions to ask. The Al-Qaeda leader is not going to Islamabad or to Riyadh only in the company of the president. And that's the American president. So what has happened and what is happening is this arrogance of the empire, despite the fact that the empire is crippled and dying from within, the arrogance remains. And the other people, other cultures, are unwilling to engage in any way that will bring about a response from this crippled, dying empire. Nothing but violence and bile. It's like a pit bull. Even if the pit bull has gone crippled, a pit bull behaves as a pit bull. Right? And so no other dog in the neighborhood is going to challenge the pit bull until the pit bull collapses on its own and is finished. Because that is the rational instinct of anybody not wanting to be hurt, self-inflicted wounds. So coming back to Iran, brother, I mean, it is the lack of understanding of Iran, not only by the empire operators, it is also the lack of understanding among the public, even though now the public is saying, I believe 70% of the American population, Democrats, Republican, and Independents put together, and especially people under the age of 40, are, are against the war. You know, they can see this war will be further destruction of the American economy and of their opportunities in the world that they are entering or has entered as adult. You know, the American dream can now only be afforded by the Epstein people and nobody else. So, having a home, having a car, you know, children going to school and colleges paid for without getting into slavery debt that you will never be able to pay back. Uh, that dream, in that sense, is over. And that's why the domestic situation in America is so full of rancor and hostility that explodes from time to time. Nobody wants to examine it. Nobody, I mean, the people who hold the power, want to examine it. They only want to blame the others. I mean, the so-called migrants or illegal immigrants did not walk into America. It was the American government that allowed them to walk in.
Mm-hmm.
And now, after they walked in, whether it was a year ago or whether it was 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, say from Central America, the Nicaraguan, the Guatemalan, the Honduran, Mexican, they walked in because the American business interests needed a labor force, a cheap labor force, whether in farming or in building constructions and so on and so forth. And so they walked in and they were hired. And now ICE is there to pick them up and throw them out in the most brutal Gestapo fashion. And people are wondering, what did I do wrong? You brought me into your house and I came happily. And I invested over here. And now you're turning around and calling me all sorts of names. I haven't broken any laws. If anybody has broken any laws, are the people who have been calling for pizza and grape soda and so on and so forth, right? Engaged in pedophilia. And they're not people like you, brother, or me. They are the billionaires.
Mm-hmm.
They are the people of the chosen people.
Mm-hmm.
And this matter is not hidden. It is seen all around. So why I come back again to the question, why is this animosity, this tremendous animosity? I mean, America has made some sort of a peace with Russia, even though there is a war going on, has made some sort of a peace with China. I mean, Nixon went to China in 1972, sat with Mao Zedong, and opened up a relationship. But with Iran, it's now almost going to be 50 years. And the animosity continues. The people are forced to be deprived of their basic rights because of the sanctions. Some other country cannot trade with Iran because America will sanction them. Donald Trump will add 25% tariff on them, right? Anybody, he's announced it. Anybody trading with Iran, 25% tariff. So why this? This is the big question. Why? My answer is not very complex. It is rather very simple. Iran is a civilizational state. Iran's history is older than the history of Europe, history of Greece, history of Rome. In fact, Greece and Rome, when they became kingdoms, acquired power, they were engaged in war with the Persian. Alexander the Great came out, in 300 BC. In his march towards India, he went through Iran or Persia, ancient Persia. So this is a civilizational state. Its contribution in terms of civilization is massive. Its language, Farsi language, became the working language, the literary language of the population stretching from the Mediterranean all the way to China and India. India, where I was born, till the early 19th century, the language of India, the official language of India, was Farsi, that's Persian. Think about it, brother. My grandparents, they learned Persian. It is only after the conquest of India by Britain that the use of Persian in the government was changed to English, and people got educated in English. So that's how I speak English with you, brother. Um, my great grandparents would have been speaking Persian as fluently as Persian because that was their language. The great literary works uh, were written in Persian. I mean, Persian poetry is famous. You know, it's like Shakespeare or Molière or Virgil, the Latin. Um, and so, as a civilizational state, it brings a rich history, which is the identity of Iran and its contribution. And it wants to preserve that. It wants to preserve that. It identify its own identity, self-identity, and its place in the world, like the Chinese civilization, which is 5,000 year old. They're not going to give up. I mean, their civilizational legacy just because in a particular time and place in history, the leadership of China that emerges, the leadership of China became Marxist, communist. But now, as Deng Xiaoping says, Marxism, communism, whatever it is, we in China use it in Chinese script. That means we have turned it into a Chinese instrument, to serve the interests of China. So, in the case of Iran, this is a civilizational state. This is where great religions were born, like Zoroastrianism, like Manichaeism, and then came Islam in 622 AD, and Iran was the first country that came within the orbit of Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet. Some of the earliest Muslim and the most famous of them all, who became a companion of the Prophet and a member of his household. His name was Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian. So this goes back to the early 600 when the Prophet was still in Mecca and then moved to Medina in 622, the Hijrah year, and Salman was with him. So this is a very old story. So this is more than 1400-year-old story. And then the Prophet's grandson, who was martyred in the field of Karbala, Imam Hussein, he married the daughter of the last Persian emperor, non-Muslim emperor, Emperor Yazdigard III. His daughter was married to the Prophet's grandson. So now, Islam came into Iran at that juncture in history. As it spread all the way to India, all the way to China, all the way to Spain, and south into Africa, Nigeria, Mali, and Mauritania, and Niger. These are all Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries. Um, Iran was the closest. Iran was deeply, deeply became embedded in the history of Islam. And since then, the identity of the majority of people of Iran is being Muslim. And when the split came between the Sunni and the Shia as a result of the tragedy of the conflict that led to the death of Imam Ali, the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet, and then subsequently the death of his son, Imam Hussein, uh, the Iranian branched off to follow the Shia tradition. It is the same Quran, it is the same Prophet, it is the same La ilaha illallah with the Iranians and the Arabs. But they developed two approaches to how to interpret the Quran and how to construct the civil order in society within the framework of Islam. You know? And so that is a fascinating history to go into depth. Iran has been a monarchy from the time of the Baghdad Caliphate, which came about in the 8th century after the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate, which was an Arab. They were the first Arab caliphs. And then came the Abbasids. And they were Persianized people. Their language was Persian. Um, and the identity, as I said, of Iran as an Islamic society, part of the Ummah, but with the Shia tradition, has come down. It is only in the 20th century, at the time of World War I and soon after, that under the pressure of the British had taken the southern part of Iran or Persia, that is along the coast, the Persian Gulf. Why? Because oil had been discovered there. And the British moved in and seized the land, the empire. So empire seized the land in the south, where the basic oil discovery had taken place, and the British, as a result of that, turned the naval fleet from being coal-fired to now being run by oil, just before the First World War. And in the north, the Russian Empire came down. And so during the time of the revolution, what became the Soviet Union, they came down the Caspian Sea to the edge of Tehran. In fact, the capital of Iran. In fact, Tehran was for a long time, since the end of World War I till the end of Second World War, was under the influence of the Soviets. So it is in this time, the last dynasty of Persia was suffering and from inside collapsing under the pressures of the British and the Russians. And so one of the military officers, a Cossack commander of the Persian army, a man by the name of Reza Shah, he led a coup, and then he declared himself the king, Shah. Reza Shah is the father of Muhammad Shah, the man who was overthrown during the revolution. So Reza Shah became a king, and he wanted to follow the footsteps of Kemal Mustafa of Turkey. Remember, Turkey was the center of the Ottoman Empire. That was the Caliphate. They lost World War I, and as a result, Turkey was divided. The Ottoman Empire was divided. All of the Middle Eastern states, including Palestine, were part of the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And so further destruction of the Ottoman Empire, that is carving up of the Anatolian Peninsula, which is modern-day Turkey, by the Italian, by the Greeks, by the French, and by the British, was stopped by Mustafa Kemal, who was one of the leading generals of the Ottoman army that had won fame by defeating the Allied forces in the Gallipoli campaign, organized by Churchill in 1915. He gathered the remnants of the Ottoman army, put it together, and under his leadership, just like George Washington, he faced the Allied armies in Anatolia and one by one he defeated them. That's an amazing story. And so Kemal Mustafa is later on celebrated as Kemal Atatürk, that is the father of Turkey, because he saved what remained of the Ottoman Empire, that is Turkey, and turned it into a republic. He was a soldier, and his title was given to him. Ghazi means the victor. Uh, and so Kemal Atatürk became the model, just as Bolivar in Latin America, or Washington for the American, Napoleon for the French. Um, Kemal Mustafa became the model, the man to follow, to imitate, because Kemal Mustafa not only united the leftover Turkey and made it into eventually a powerful state. Today, it is a pretty powerful state. Um, that others would do the same thing. And Reza Shah was trying to follow uh, the Kemal Mustafa. But there came the Second World War, and the Turks had connection with the Germans, and Reza Shah had connection also with the Germans, and the Germans were now being led by Hitler. And so the British planned a coup and removed Reza Shah from power and put his son, Muhammad Shah, as the king. This was in 1941. And Muhammad Shah was a young man, 20, 21 years old. But a young man, 20, 21 years old, would be under the control captured by the empire, so he would be the instrument of the empire. And that's what happened. And the war ended. Iran was the base for the conference where Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin came and met. The famous Tehran conference of 1943. That's where they planned the future military operation for Europe and so on and so forth. And Muhammad Shah was the king. But there was an independent parliament, and within the independent parliament, there were all segments of the Iranian society represented through their own election. And one segment of the bloc that was represented were the religious leaders, the ulama or the clerics, the mullahs. And all of them were pretty much nationalists in their orientation. So by the end of the Second World War, there was a consensus among the parliamentarians that the Iranians deserve a better oil deal, because it was the English running the uh, oil industry, the extraction and so on. And the Iranians were getting just a pittance from the English. It was called the Anglo-Persian or Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The Americans had not yet gotten into Iran, but the Americans were there in Saudi Arabia, Aramco, Arab American Company, which is what they ran in Saudi Arabia, and the other Gulf states. So, in the case of Iran, that was the parliamentary consensus, and that consensus came into full force under Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister, in 1950-51. Mossadegh was like all the people who became leaders of the global South. He belonged to that age group born in the late 19th century. So he was in his 50s. All of them, by all of them, I would say people like Ho Chi Minh, Zhou Enlai of China, Deng Xiaoping of China, Jawaharlal Nehru of India, Jinnah of Pakistan, Mahatma Gandhi of India, and so on and so forth. They all went to Europe to study. Either they went to England or they went to France, depending upon their connections, which was their empire. The English empire was in India, so Nehru, Jinnah, Mahatma Gandhi, they all went to England, the Lincoln Inns to study law. Ho Chi Minh and all, because they were part of the French Empire, Indochina, they went to France. Same with the Chinese. And also people like Muhammad Mossadegh. He went to France, to Sorbonne, he studied law, became a lawyer, and he studied philosophy. And they came back. So they were, in that sense, Europeanized. That means they had studied in the Western universities. And they came home not only as proud Iranians, but also as a modern human being, having experienced the technology, the sciences, so on in Europe. And they wanted to adapt to that. They wanted to bring about the process of modernization and development in their own countries, to become independent of the empires. Some of them succeeded without too much of warfare, like in India. India was too big for the British to control. Over 400 million people at that time, and British, a country of about maybe 20 million people at the best. They could not control India once Mahatma Gandhi and others started the nationalist movement. In the case of India, it was the Congress Party that they named it Indian National Congress. And by the way, many Indians who went to South Africa, who were in South Africa, born in South Africa, Mahatma Gandhi went to South Africa um, to get away from the empire. But then they ended up in South Africa, which is also part of the empire. And they created the African National Congress, of Mandela. So once the national movement started, Britain realized that it is over, that they would not be able to control and fight. So instead of fighting India, they gave India independence and developed a relationship with India uh, that was different than what some of the other European states did, like Belgium in Congo, massacre. It was called the Heart of Darkness, horrible, horrible massacres that took place. I mean, they called Africa the Dark Continent. Um, so different places had different responses to the empire, European empires. In the case of Iran, as a country trapped between two empires, they wanted their independence, but the immediate target was to get the resources under control. And so that's where Mohammad Mossadegh and the parliament nationalized the oil company in 1951. And lo and behold, the British did not want that to become the example for others in Africa. Africa was still under the empires. And they were going to punish Mossadegh. But they were not in a position to do it all by themselves. They got the America, the CIA. And this is the irony. Eisenhower had become the president, and Eisenhower knew all of these things. And yet Eisenhower went along with the politics and the policy of the Dulles brother, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was the CIA chief, and John Foster Dulles was the Secretary of State. And for them, the boogaboo became communism. Everybody, under every pillow there is a communist, and if there is a communist, they have to be clobbered, destroyed. And the policy of containment, put a ring around the Soviet Union. By that time, China had fallen, and the big hue and cry in Washington, who lost China? That became the battle cry, to blame each other as if it was for them to lose China, as if China is not their own people. But the Chinese Revolution succeeded. They stood up in 1949, and the satellite of America was expelled, that is Chiang Kai-shek. He's still in Taiwan. Um, but in Iran, the nationalization of oil could not be tolerated. And so CIA led the coup. Kermit Roosevelt was sent by Dulles. Kermit Roosevelt was the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, the president, and they did the coup in August of 1951. You might say it was one of the first colored revolution, like the eventually the colored revolution that happened in Ukraine in February 2014, when the elected president of Ukraine was removed by a coup, and Zelensky and all came in. The Nazis came to power. Well, in the case of Iran, um, Mossadegh was overthrown, later arrested and put away for life. Um, and the Shah of Iran, Muhammad Shah, this young man, he had fled. At the first sign of nationalization and the coup, he fled thinking that everything will be lost. And it could have been lost if Muhammad Mossadegh had taken sufficiently strong military action. But he didn't, because he did not expect the Americans to be doing what they did. Nobody had such an experience that America would be the land of the free and the brave, the beacon of democracy, and would do such a heinous act, interfere in the life of other people and overthrow their elected government and so on and so forth. He didn't anticipate it, and so the coup succeeded. Um, and the Shah, who had fled to Rome, came back. And so from 1953, when the coup happened, till 1977, 78, when the revolution in Iran began, for 25 years, the Shah ran Iran with the protection of America and the British, uh, supporting all of the policy of America in the Middle East, being seen as America's closest ally, actually being a satellite of America, carrying on trade, commerce, and supplying Israel with the oil, um, to and kept that going despite the wars, despite the conflict. Um, Till that 77, 78 came along, because his regime, the Shah regime, was beneficial to the rich and the powerful within Iran, the old landlords, the moneyed people, and those who made money under the Shah with the contracts with the Americans. The Americans started engaging in building up the refineries, building up urban centers, and so on. They provided the equipment, and Iran provided the oil money, the petrodollars. So that was the contractual agreement, uh, and so on. And a lot of Iranians in this period, 25 years, they came to America to study. Many stayed behind. Many went back. So there's a large population of Iranian American in Los Angeles. Um, so this relationship developed. Um, there was no, from the Iranian side, there was no animus or antipathy towards the Americans. The nationalist Iranians, and the national Iranians were a very large segment of the population, if not the majority of the population. They had anger that their government had been overthrown by a coup, that Iran could have developed a democracy, a constitutional monarchy, and so on and so forth. But under Reza Shah, it was a very oppressive regime with a very uh, heavy-handed uh, police force and intelligence force, Savak, that was engaged in controlling any and all discussion. Uh, there was no open engagement allowed. So, or at least it targeted the people who they saw as danger. And there were underground opposition to the Shah, but the Shah was military was very powerful and the police force was very powerful until the eruption happened eventually. Um, and here the point to take into notice is the religious clerics, a whole segment of them, especially the younger ones, and especially those who were in leadership position at the time of the coup in 1953, were nationalists. They wanted independence. They were not secular, but nationalists. And so a combined force of opposition came together with the young generation that had gone to the West and imbibed uh, various ideas of nationalism, Marxism, socialism. But they were devoted to the position of getting Iran's independence. And then the religious clerics. And then there were independent thinkers and scholars who wrote about all of this thing. And one of the terms that became very, very popular among this class of people was this notion in English. The Farsi word is different. It's Garbzadegi, but translated into English, it means West toxification or West infatuation. That means to be infatuated with the West, to give up your own culture. So you must have seen those pictures that are displayed. That Iran before the revolution, the women went around in miniskirt, and hair cut short, and you cannot distinguish them from the Europeans and so on and so forth. Uh, well, yes, there was that segment of the society, but that was not the majority segment of the society. And this class of people looked down upon the others who had abandoned their own culture, 1,000+ year of culture and Islam and their Shia identity. And it is in the midst of that group of people that eventually Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, who had been sent into exile by the Shah in 1963, and he was in exile living in Iraq. And then under Saddam Hussein, he was pushed out of Iraq. And so he went to France, to Paris, outside of Paris, where he lived before he returned to Tehran during the revolution or towards the end of the revolution when the Shah fled away once again. Um, Khomeini became the voice of the opposition. Because of his stature as an Ayatollah, the masses of people who are religious, who are devoted to their belief, and in this particular case, Shiism, they would follow the Ayatollah, and they followed the Ayatollah. And a revolution happened, which was the combined forces of all various people, but the religious people were the most organized element that eventually took the leadership. And under Ayatollah Khomeini's direction, Iran, a monarchical Iran, was abolished, and a republic was created. But it would be an Islamic republic, and it would be an Islamic republic run on the framework of the Islamic tradition and its sacred scripture, the Quran, and the traditions of the Prophet. And in the case of Shia, not only the tradition of the Prophet, but in addition, the traditions of the Imam, that is the family of the Prophet, through Imam Ali and Imam Hussein. And so Ayatollah Khomeini constructed the framework, provided the interpretation based upon the scriptures of what came to be known as Vilayat-e-Faqih, which means the guardianship of the jurist. Now, that has become the problematic issue for people in the West. They call it Iran is a fanatical Islamic terrorist, violent, murderous state. These ayatollahs, these clerics do not represent the people. And what Iran needs is back again a secular government, maybe with the uh, son of the last monarch, Muhammad Shah, who resides in America and who is a complete puppet of the Israelis. And this is their ambition to destroy this Islamic Republic, which has revised and revitalized the Islamic tradition in terms of Shiaism in Iran. So that is organic, that is indigenous, and that is based upon over 1,000 years of history. And this is intolerable by the empire. That's the animus. And Iran and Ayatollah, or the republic that he established, um, has survived all sorts of storms. The worst storm was the 8 year of warfare that was green lighted by the Americans under Jimmy Carter in 1980, when Saddam Hussein attacked Iran to overthrow the republic, expecting, again, they calculated, just as they calculated last December and January, that if there is an uprising that they can bring about inside Iran, the republic is so weak that it will be overthrown. Just as it was, the government in 1953 was overthrown, and they will be able to install their favorite, you know, vassal. So, but that war backfired. It was one of the longest war in 20th century history, after the Vietnam War. 8 years, 1980 to 1988. And every Western power, starting with America, supported Saddam Hussein. And then when Saddam Hussein was not required, he became the enemy. you know. But in 1988, he was supported. He was provided with arms, equipment, chemical and biological weapon. Mustard gas was used against Iranian, and Iran was all alone. But the Iran's military equipment, particularly the Air Force, had been built up by the Shah by purchasing American equipments, American Tomcats and all the other, I can't recall all the name of it, but American jets and so on and so forth. Um, and After the revolution, they did not have access to the spare parts. In fact, all of the asset that was abroad, like the Soviet Russian assets, was seized, and it is still seized by the Americans. They haven't released it. Um, and so Iran could not get uh, the spare parts that they needed. And what did the Americans do? Behind the back of the Congress at that time, uh, by this time Reagan had become the president, and under him, one of his national security staff, Colonel Oliver North, if you remember him, became the point man. And all of this was done secretly. Contacts were made through third party sources with the Iranian government to, to sell them um, the spare parts. And the spare part was directed to the Israelis to be sold to the Iranians. And the money from the spare parts would then, again, because it was money that was trafficked and laundered outside the normal course of such transaction, were used, black money, were to be used to fund the Contras against the Nicaraguan Sandinistas. So that was the Iran Contra thing that came about. And uh, Ronald Reagan would have been impeached, but Ronald Reagan claimed that he was not aware of all of this. So his National Security Council advisor at that time, Poindexter, had to resign, and Oliver North had to resign. I don't know whether Oliver North went to jail.
Yes, he went to jail.
He went to jail. It was a violation of the Boland Amendment that there can be no money or aid given to the Contras. And so that was violated. But on the Iranian side, what I understand that when Ayatollah Khomeini learned that some of the spare parts came from Israel, uh, you know, stamped Israel uh, in the spare part. Uh, Ayatollah Khomeini ordered his people uh, to return them, that he would not use them, anything from Israel. Um, so the Iran Contra thing did happen, but there was the Israeli connection. And what, again, the intelligence forces and the propagandists have done is try to smear the Islamic Republic, that the Islamic Republic took spare parts and money from Israel in the 1980s, which is not borne by the facts from the Iranian side. Um, but the war ended in 1988 in a manner in which it showed the hands of American. If an American cruiser or destroyer, USS Vinson in the Persian Gulf, shot down a civil airline, Airbus 300 Iranian civil airline, flying from Tehran to Qatar across the Persian Gulf, and shot it down. And 290 people, including the crew, all of them died in that thing. It was the worst airline shoot down that took place in that period of time. And the Americans claimed that, well, the captain of the of the ship, Vincennes, mistook the plane for a fighter jet, and it was flying under the code of an airline. So after that crash, after the shoot down, Ayatollah Khomeini realized or understood that carrying on this war is not only futile, but it has become very, very destructive for Iran. And so he accepted the UN ceasefire resolution. The war ended. But by the time the war ended, the casualties both among Iraqis and Iranians exceeded somewhere between 1 million and 2 million people. 500,000 people, 500,000 people were counted as dead. And the cost of the war went up several $1 trillion from these two poor countries, oil producing countries. So that was the animus, and that happened. The other animus is hostility, is the hostage crisis. The Iranians in November 1979, the students stormed the American embassy and took 52 diplomats as hostages. From the Iranian side of the argument is that they wanted the Shah to be sent back to Iran, but the Shah ended up in America, with Kissinger and all, insisting that the Shah should be allowed to come to America. Initially, Jimmy Carter was not open to the idea, but the Shah came to America, and that became then the predicate for the Iranians to say that, this might be the basis on which they're going to do another coup, another attack on Iran. And to prevent that, they took hostages, the diplomat. Now, it is against international law. That's no disputing about it. The diplomats have their immunity. But the relationship with Iran and the history behind what has happened in Iran with the Americans, one can understand the anger and the frustration of the Iranians at that time. So the hostage crisis, then the Iran-Iraq war, the position that Ayatollah Khomeini took, which has become, in that sense, uh, something that no Iranian Republican member of the government is going to back away from, uh, which is the support for the Palestinian people under occupation. Uh, Ayatollah Khomeini invited Yasser Arafat to come to Tehran, and they met, and Ayatollah basically blessed him. Uh, and then Ayatollah declared the last Friday of Ramadan, you know, from now on, he said, should be marked as Al Quds Day, that's Al Jerusalem Day, you know. So I mean, Ramadan is coming, next week is Ramadan. The last Friday, right around the Muslim world, the people will mark Friday as the Al Quds Day. So all of these things, brother, comes together to understand um, why Iran is taking the position it has taken. It believes very strongly in terms of their values, that is Islamic values, and the values of martyrdom, which is the Shia value, not to make any compromise, and that the system of government, Vilayat of Haqi, is based on the idea of guardianship. You know, so like the Supreme Court in America is supposed to be one branch of the government that is supposed to police the guardrail of the Constitution. We might say it has failed in many instances, but at least that in theory, that is how it was constructed, the three branches of government. So in Iran, the republic, the three branches of government are, or the number of branches of government are, there is the one branch, which is the Vilayat of Faqih, which is the guardrail of the Islamic values in Islamic Republic. And then there is the non-clerical branch of the government, the presidency, the prime ministership, the defense, and so on and so
I would like to say this also. Don't forget that during the hostage crisis, the Ayatollah Khomeini, he ordered the release of the all black people that were held as hostages, and the women. He said because they were all oppressed by the U.S. government, so he ordered their immediate release and return. So that gets left out of this too. So we do have to add that footnote to everything.
That's right. And I know many Americans who have traveled to Iran after the revolution until very lately. I myself have traveled to Iran during after the revolution, met with people and seen the people. There's nothing but love and affection of the Iranian for the Americans. You know, Americans have joined the demonstrations, as the one that happened a few days ago, when something like 25 million Iranians came out in all the various cities to mark the February Revolution of 1979. So, yeah, there is people to people, there is no animosity, no anger. And they understand very well the nature of what you just now mentioned, the Black Americans who have paid a tremendous price and continues to pay a price in the sense of the degree of bigotry that they face in America. So they understand that, and that was exactly the message that Ayatollah Khomeini sent to the Americans. You know, we had no problem with the American brothers and sisters, and you know, we are open to continue our relationship.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on another edition of the platform. I mean, we got to bring you back to do a part three on this situation because you give us so much history, which we love, and so much insight that is missing as we connect these geopolitical and economic dots. And I want to say shukram for you being here.
Oh, it is my pleasure to be with you, brother. And Ramadan is coming, so may all the blessings of Ramadan be with you and your family.
Likewise, be blessed, and I'll send you the video. Be safe too.
Yeah, thank you so much. And
Everybody,
I'm sorry I ran into this trouble with my computer. You know, luckily my daughter was here. She came and fixed it. So
I can't say anything. My son does that to me on a weekly basis. Something happens that I have to call my son in, and he does things because I don't understand it, and but he does. He can write code and everything, so I don't understand it. But I'll send you the video. We'll talk later. Thank you so much.
thank
Shukran.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, listen. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share. And I want to. This was an excellent conversation. We got an insight on history and everything leading up to why America has so much animosity towards the Islamic Republic of Iran. There was good chat, good conversation in the chat. I couldn't put up everything because we were trying to. I didn't want to interrupt the professor because when he's rolling, let him roll because we get so much information, and so we have to respect that. I don't like to be like other hosts and cut people off, especially in the middle of their thoughts, because sometimes some people are dropping gems for you to get. So we have to be very appreciative and also be very mindful when people are speaking to respect them. And I want to say this to everybody before we go off there. Remember to do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or because there's some accolades behind it. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember that God Almighty is watching you. And as my late, great, and beautiful, wonderful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low at the actions of man. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that the true and living God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Peace. We're out of here. Thank you so much.
I want